And now we've finally come to a Batman movie that I can unapologetically say is actually really good. Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Now, Batman Mask of the Phantasm came out in 1993 and has a complicated legacy of both being an underrated gem that not a lot of people know about, but also being the #1 best Batman movie ever made. And I feel like nowadays with the internet, it's gotten really hyped up as being this iconic Batman movie that just gets Batman perfectly right. No notes. It's a flawless Batman movie. And it's really hard for me to argue that point because I really do love this movie. I think it is a fantastic Batman movie. Has it been overhyped in the past few years? Yeah, probably, because it is still just a glorified direct-to-TV movie. The storytelling is not on the same level or scale as something like The Dark Knight or even the Tim Burton Batman films. Those were much more ambitious in their conception, being live action, being this mega franchise that just got more popular up until, well, Batman and Robin. But Batman Mask of the Phantasm came from much more humble beginning. This was originally going to be a spin-off TV movie using the same people that worked on Batman the Animated Series, so there's a lot of continuity in the storytelling and the depictions, characterizations between this movie and the animated series. And I think that's why this movie in recent years has garnered so many new fans. Because people that love the Batman the Animated Series characters and voice actors, and there's a lot to love there, just associate this movie with that same world and just lump all that in as the DC animated universe and just put all that praise on this movie, then some of it is warranted. But I also want to make a clear delineation because I'm not reviewing Batman the Animated Series. That series will probably get its own video someday. I've already reviewed a few episodes from the DC animated universe and little one-off videos, but that series definitely deserves its own video. But here I want to only talk about Batman Mask of the Phantasm because there's a lot of things that work in this movie that are separate from the animated series. For one, the actual animation looks a lot better here than it did in even some of the best episodes of the animated series because they're given a little bit more of a budget, a longer runtime. They can make these pretty cartoony character models feel like they have real weight and shadow and form to them. And it all just helps to make the animation look cleaner and look a little bit more polished because this movie did get a theatrical release, even though it wasn't originally intended to. At some point in the production, somebody at Warner Brothers saw that this was actually turning out really good, and so they wanted to put it in theaters to give it a little bit more exposure. And they did, and while it didn't do huge numbers in the box office, it did start to grow a cult following, especially having it so closely associated with the animated series. And Batman in this movie is, of course, voiced by the legendary Kevin Conroy. He is a fantastic voice for Batman and Bruce Wayne. The work he's done with this character is so prolific. He's popped up in movies and TV shows and video games, and anybody who's consumed really any Batman media that's not live action has heard his voice at some point, I'm sure of it, and he brings his A game here. You have a Batman that's fairly early in his career as a crime fighter. He's flying solo. He doesn't have 100 Robins hanging around. It's really just him and Alfred, and he's fighting crime. He's not on great terms with police, especially when there's this new character coming into Gotham, and he starts executing all these mobsters in some pretty grisly PG rated ways. Now, there's no blood and guts, and it's not super graphic, but there are quite a few death scenes that, while not super violent, are memorable. Like, for instance, when Chucky Saw dies in the graveyard, you see him in a literal grave, and then the Phantasm pushes the tombstone over, squishing him, killing him, and while you don't see the body, he's definitely dead. He does not come back from that. And that happens a few different times early on in this movie. The Phantasm is killing all these different mobsters. Everybody thinks it's Batman because he's got a cape and he flies around and he uses smoke. So there are a lot of parallels with Batman, and everybody on the police force just assumes that the Bat has lost it. He's gone over the edge. Batman's given up his no-killing rule, which in this universe he's always adhered to. And now Batman's got his hands full because he's got to investigate these killings, he's got to figure out who this Phantasm is, and he's got to avoid the cops in the process because they're trying to hunt him down. So already you got a pretty intense Batman story, especially coming from the people that did Batman the Animated Series, because that series, while fantastic and really mature for a children's animated program, it always treated Batman's relationship with Commissioner Gordon and the police force with a certain air of ambiguity where they don't necessarily approve of Batman, except for Gordon, who's 100% on his side, and Batman doesn't really do too much to antagonize the police force. It's his relationship that I'm sure if you watched all the episodes and you dug real deep into it, you could track how his relationships with the cops have evolved and the inner workings of it. But the show doesn't seem nearly as interested in that as giving us an interesting villain for Batman to fight week in and week out. And that's really where the fun is in that show. But here, the villain isn't actually that interesting. And I will say that that is a negative for this movie. I know everyone thought I was just going to praise the heck out of this movie because it's fantastic. And it is, and I will, but there are some flaws that I've always had with this movie. And one of it is the actual Phantasm character. I think he's got a pretty cool look, but it's not that original, is it? Because it kind of just looks like a knockoff Batman mixed with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come from A Christmas Carol, and that kind of Grim Reaper design is just so cliche. It's been done to death. There's about a handful of actual Batman villains that have used a similar look, and I know that's what Bruce Timm was pulling from when he created this character, because it is a completely original character, and I give him credit for that. And because it is an original character, the mystery of who the Phantasm is a legitimate one. The first time you watch this movie, you don't immediately know who he is. You have a couple red herrings here and there, but until it's revealed that, spoiler alert, it's Andrea Beaumont, voiced by Dana Delaney, who actually went on to voice Lois Lane later in this series, and she's done a few other voice work here and there. Every time I hear her voice, I always hear Lois Lane because I feel like that was the role that she was born to play. But that's not to say she doesn't do a good job here. She brings to life a likable, charming character that Bruce used to have a relationship with back in the day before he became Batman. And when she returns to Gotham, there is an interesting romantic subplot with Bruce Wayne that, well, what if he actually found happiness and he gave up the life of the cowl and the Batman and that whole persona because his life is at peace. He finally found someone that also suffered a tragedy, and that could have brought them closer. But instead, they were separated. Bruce Wayne became Batman, and Andrea, fueled by vengeance, became the murderer known as the Phantasm. And that's all really interesting character stuff that this movie excels at. When you have these quieter moments, these character scenes, like the scenes where Bruce is at the graveyard and him and Andrea are talking, or when he's talking to his dead parents, these are heavy hitter scenes where you really understand that Bruce is not right in the head. A person that becomes Batman is not entirely sane. And this movie addresses that in a way that's both really deep and profound, but also accessible to a younger audience. Everything in this movie has layers to it. You can watch it as a kid and just be entertained because it's Batman and the Phantasm, and there's certain characters you recognize, and they're punching people, and there's a good deal of action here too. I'm not trying to make it out that it's just this drama that plays out. No, there is a good deal of classic Batman action, but I feel like a lot of people were expecting that going in. What they weren't expecting are these character moments that really make Kevin Conroy's Batman and Andrea Beaumont and even the Joker have some really interesting bits of dialogue where you understand their relationship, their history, their backstory in a way that was never really expanded on in the animated series. This brings a whole new dimension to Batman and what this interpretation is willing to offer fans that want to see where the writers can take these characters when given a feature-length script to explore. But a lot of those positives I just said about Andrea and her character and her relationship with Bruce all come through in the scenes where she's not wearing the Phantasm costume. When she's in costume and the Phantasm is terrorizing people, sure, it's fun in that kind of popcorn entertainment kind of way, and it is a unique take to see him actually rack up a body count. It's kind of a bland character. It doesn't have the same flair as something like the Joker or Two-Face or the Riddler or any of the classic Batman villains that we've gotten, not just in this show, but just in Batman canon in general, because there's plenty of Batman villains that were not in the animated series. There's not a lot that come to mind, but I'm sure they're there. And part of me wishes that they would have taken this opportunity to explore one of those characters that already has a history in the comics. So the movie, I think, does suffer a little bit because of that. As much as I like what they did in the writing of this character, the visual is not all that exciting and it is a little forgettable. But I feel like the people working on this movie knew that, and they did give us a Batman villain that is incredibly memorable and very well executed, and that is the Joker. The Joker is actually in this movie. movie. And the first time I ever saw this movie, we had rented it from some video store way back in the day, and I popped it in not knowing that the Joker was in it. Now, I did not like the Joker that much when I was a kid. I was kind of scared of clowns. I tried to keep my distance from a lot of Joker media at that time, even though I loved Batman. It was a really weird time to be a Batman fan back then. When the Joker popped up, I was not ready for it, and I did not like the movie after that. But having grown up and gotten over those fears, I love the use of the Joker in this movie. I think he's used perfectly because he is such a scene stealer in this movie, and he's not overused. I feel like there was a big temptation to really play him up and make him the main antagonist here, but no, it's still the Phantasm. That's still the core of the story. That's what it's really about. But the Joker's in there just to give a little extra cast, a little extra flavor to this movie, to let you know that yes, we understand Batman characters, and when you push mobsters hard enough and make them desperate enough, they'll reach out to the Clown Prince of Crime, and then he'll just make everything worse. And that's exactly what happens in this movie. One of the mobsters in this movie gets so paranoid and desperate because all of his buddies were killed by the Phantasm that he reaches out to the Joker, who used to be part of their gang. You actually get a little bit of Joker backstory in here too, and it's not to the point where they completely spell everything out and you know the whole backstory of the Joker, but you get just enough little hints that as you watch it and rewatch it, you can start to put together a mental picture of who the Joker was before he fell into the vat of acid and became the Joker. And the Joker here is, of course, played by Mark Hamill. Just like Kevin Conroy, he was the perfect voice for the Joker. And unfortunately, after the death of Kevin Conroy, we're probably not going to get any more Mark Hamill Joker voice work, which is a shame, but I understand his reasons. It's hard to be paired up with a different Batman after he spent so many years with that one person and have done such amazing work together. And here it's no different. Mark Hamill brings that same zany energy to the Joker that we love, and he's actually allowed to go a little darker, a little bit more sinister here than he was in some of the episodes of Batman the Animated Series. And in the second half of this movie, you get a lot more of that classic Batman action, Batman tension in that model Gotham City of the future that looks an awful lot like Metropolis. Not the Metropolis from DC Comics, but the Fritz Lang Metropolis, that Art Deco style that really inspired this series and this movie. That style is everywhere. I love the aesthetic of it. But even though this movie and the script and even the storyboarding is a bit more grounded than some of the zany antics of the animated series, it still has a place for that classic Batman and Joker banter, their sense of humor, Joker constantly cracking jokes at Batman's expense, trying to get him off his game, and it's just absurdly entertaining. This lasts like 30 to 40 minutes, are really perfect, and it ends in a pretty mature ending where Andrea is most likely going to kill the Joker and Batman's trying to reason with her, and Andrea makes it clear that she has chosen her path and she's not going to turn back. She's going to follow this to fruition, and the Joker lets out an incredible laugh while everything's going up in flames, and they just disappear in a cloud of smoke. And you don't know if Andrea died in that explosion, if the Joker died in that explosion, although we know that the Joker always pops up. So I don't think anybody's really concerned that the Joker wasn't going to make it out alive. But for Andrea, it's a little bit ambiguous because Batman just barely made it out alive after all those explosions. But then we have probably the best scene in the whole movie. I know a lot of people like to talk about those flashbacks with Batman suiting up for the first time as being the most impactful scene in the movie. And while that is a great scene, the cinematography not showing the full costume that Batman has when he suits up, and really all those flashbacks have a great weight to them when you know the person that Bruce Wayne becomes, and it just has this real tragic sense about it. The scene I want to focus on is at the very end of this movie when Batman and Alfred have a heart-to-heart about could Andrea be saved, or was she just too far gone? And Alfred talks to Bruce man to man, saying that he watches him walk that abyss every night when he goes out and is always terrified that he's going to succumb to the vengeance that he's harbored since his parents died, and is Batman gonna go off the edge someday? And it just brings to such a fine point the themes surrounding this movie about revenge and loss and grief, and what do you do with that anger, and is there a way to push through that to be something positive, or will you be like Andrea and just fall into that abyss and never come out again? And then after all of that, Batman walks away a little sad, but also a little relieved after the kind words that Alfred gave, and he sees something twinkling in the Batcave, and he grabs it, and it's the locket that Andrea had, and it gives him a little hope. That was like, oh, maybe she did make it out. Maybe there is hope. So there's a little bit of that ambiguous, optimistic feeling. So the little kids that walk out of the theater crying after this downbeat ending. There's something about this ending that I've always wondered about, and it's that, did the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie rip off this movie's ending? Because in the same way Batman finds Andrea's locket in the Batcave twinkling and he grabs it, at the very end of the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, after Elektra dies and he's all sad but he's moving on with his life, he finds her necklace dangling on the roof of one of the buildings, and he touches it and he feels the braille and he recognizes it as hers. And that is almost too similar to the ending of Mask of the Phantasm. I feel like Daredevil kind of ripped off this movie a little bit, and I think it's safe to say that Mask of the Phantasm is the superior movie between the two. It may not be the most colorful or action-packed or ambitious in scale of any of the Batman movies, but it's probably the one Batman movie that gets Bruce Wayne 100% right. This movie, I'd say, better than any other Batman movie, aside from maybe Batman Begins, because that also focuses a lot on Bruce Wayne's character and develops him in a really interesting way. Here we really get a sense of who Bruce Wayne is, what the death of his parents really did to him psychologically, and probably most interesting of all, how does he cope with the possibility of finding love, finding a relationship beyond the Batcave, beyond the hurt that he's carried with him for so many years. And as someone who's getting kind of sick of Batman just being handed love interests every movie like it's a James Bond franchise or something, here the relationship between Andrea and Bruce Wayne is hands down the best realized, the most adult and mature relationship that I've ever seen Batman grapple with in a movie, live action or animated. And this movie was based off of a cartoon show for kids. This is just a fantastic outing from a team that has consistently pumped out great Batman material, and this is probably their crowning achievement. It's a great film. Whether or not you like the animated series or not, it just has a really compelling Bruce Wayne story at the heart of it. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Batman Mask of the Phantasm? Is it the best Batman movie ever? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content. And hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is My Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.